ci sta un po' sfilacciando.
È l'ultimo, è sempre...
Gli ultimi della fila. Saremo brevi.
Allora, intanto grazie di resistere alla fine della giornata. Volevo ricordarvi innanzitutto che c'è un questionario per tutti i partecipanti di Nova che va compilato, elettronico, e domani penso verranno distribuite le domande o le risposte alle domande. Allora, il panel, sorry, I speak in Italian, I don't know why, but let's switch to English. I just forgot. So, this panel is about why isn't the Silicon Valley in Piacenza? I don't know who is from Piacenza because I would have said in Sicily, at least as a weather-like is similar, more similar to California than
Naples,
Piacenza.
Naples.
But anyway, so the question is why we cannot reproduce a Silicon Valley in Italy, in some place in Italy, and to this topic, the topic will be dealt by three fantastic panelists. Starting on my left, we have Gianmauro Calafiore, who has experience of startups both in Italy and in California, in the real Silicon Valley. And then to my right, we have Nicola Fiordalisi, who is a partner at Bryan Cave here in Chicago. He's a lawyer and will explain to us the challenges that we have for an Italian entrepreneur to move to the United States. And then to the extreme right, we have Ignazio Rocco di Torra Padula, who is a founder and CEO of Credimi, which is a new startup that does lending to medium-sized firms in Italy, and he has a long experience in the banking sector. So let me start with Gianmauro, and I want to sort of present the situation as follows, and Gianmauro actually described it to me a bit, to say there is an ecosystem that makes startups, and in particular high-tech startup in California much easier than anywhere else. You have a strong university that produces innovation. This innovation produces ideas and entrepreneurs. There are venture capitalists who live up there. And so the combination of the ideas produced by the universities and the capital that is present there creates startups. And these startups then either grow and into the new Googles, who are going to create more money that goes back to the universities, and this closes the cycle, or they are acquired by the existing Googles, etc., and then this creates again more money that goes back to feed the circle. And so in Italy we don't have that yet. So I want to start with Gianmauro and ask him, what is your experience in the Silicon Valley, and what is your experience in the Italian Silicon Valley wannabe?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for inviting to this nice event. So I started a few companies in Italy and raised capital, and then the company were acquired. And then I spent some time investing in companies, so on the other side. And the last company I started, Lupei Labs, that is focusing on the development of cognitive robots. I decided to start it in Silicon Valley. And the main reason that I started the company there was not for the capital, but because of the human resources. So in this case, I basically found the scientists that were required to start this artificial intelligence project from one lab that got a big investment from DARPA, 200 million. And so they basically had the opportunity to recruit worldwide the best people and to bring them in the same campus to develop this military project. And so as Luigi was saying, the one thing that I found as a difference between Italy and having experienced both of the countries between Italy and US is the massive investment that research institutions receive from private and public funds. And so in our case, I was able to start the company very fast because the bureaucracy, of course, it's much smaller here in US compared to Italy, but also because I found the right team for this high tech that I wanted to build. So in Italy, it's a little. I think it's a little bit difficult to sometimes to. I mean, from the bureaucracy perspective, but here we have Nicola that is on the US side, and so we were discussing earlier. I mean that there are some instruments and some different ways of approaching the bootstrap of a company.
But actually, before we get to the negative view of what Italy cannot do or has a problem, I want to hear the positive view of Ignazio, that is an entrepreneur in Italy, says that Italy is the new Mecca for entrepreneurship. Please.
Well, I don't know if it is the new Mecca, but at least, in my case, what we are trying to do so far, and we are launching now, so we will see in 2 or 3 years. But so far, I could not complain about what we found in Italy. First of all, our product is a bit different than artificial intelligence. So I would define our startup. We are in mid-tech, probably, not in high-tech. What we are doing is a product which is catering to all the Italian SMEs, which, as you know, there are many, as we say today. These SMEs typically have a problem, which is when they invoice clients in Italy, they are paid after 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. So there is a big need for working capital financing, invoice financing, which is typically done with banks and factoring companies. And it's not the best experience in the world. What we are providing is something which is 10 times simpler, 10 times faster, and also 10 times more flexible. It's a very simple product. You can submit your invoice on an internet interface. The invoice is read, and in 3 or 4 hours, you receive a decision and a price. Decision whether you can be financed or not, and if you can be financed, how much you can get for that invoice. So it's as simple as that. You submit an invoice of 10,000 euro, and the system will tell you we can give you, 9,920 euro or whatever it is. And these kind of numbers are realistic. So it's also extremely convenient, extremely in terms of price. That's the product. In order to make that product work, you need to do quite a lot of homework in terms of the risk management system, which is based on using data from multiple sources. So what we have done is we have written, right now we have 95,000 lines of codes, which are proprietary, and actually written mostly by Italian software developers, and which are pools this data, analyze the data, apply some risk algorithms, and make decisions. The other innovation, and this comes back to the funding of SMEs in Italy, is that this is funded by professional managers of savings. So this is funding actually by mutual funds. The mutual funds that in Italy are quite big, it could also be funded by insurance companies actually. They buy our portfolio of loans to SMEs. So that's the company. Why it's working well in Italy? Well, I found 15 people, they're all Italians. Some of them have worked in Google, some of them have worked in Goldman Sachs, some of them have worked in General Electric. three of them are coming back to Italy from London and from Dublin and from Zurich. They're all Italians, and actually they are very talented people. I am the only one more than 50 years old. They're mostly 30s, 28, 31, 32. Great people, honestly, to do this kind of work. Second, I found the capital. It's different sources of capital, of course. I didn't want to go to venture capital funds, but we have our investors are Benetton brothers, Nerio Alessandri, who is the owner of Technogym. Some of you might know Technogym as a firm. The owner is actually invests a lot in startups, not only my startup, but also many others. Paolo Merloni, who is part of the family that the Whirlpool leader was describing below. And Paolo Merloni has invested personally also in this startup. Lorenzo Pelliccioli is another one. And all these people decided to invest 7 millions in something which at that time was just an idea. It was myself plus this Google guy and an idea. That was it. I invested 1 million, they invested 7 million, and we promised we will make this work, we will build this product, and we will put together a team. And it actually worked. Now we are launching the product these days. There is a lot of positive reactions from entrepreneurs. We have already landed the first million in a testing mood. And we found the capital, we found the team. I would say, if I think about Milan as a hub for fintech companies, we also found many other things. There is a lot of know-how in Milan when it comes to financial services. There's know-how in technology for financial services, but you also have know-how of nitty-gritty of financial services, which is important because Milan has always been a banking hub, so you've got probably at least 10,000 or maybe 15,000 people in Milan knowledgeable about factoring and financial services. You've got legal know-how in Milan. You've got all of these things in Milan. Maybe, as I was saying before, it's more mid-tech. So you might not have the Silicon Valley in Italy, but when it comes to, the food valley, the food tech, the fashion tech, the financial services tech, these things, at least in my experience, can be done very well in Italy. And so it's probably a matter of, where can we compete with the proper advantage, and what are the other things that you cannot find in Italy and you have to go and look for them in Silicon Valley, like Gianmauro rightly did.
So, Nicola, what is your perspective, having seen both worlds?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, companies are growing, and the segment high tech and mid tech are moving faster than the law. And still, these days, it's very difficult to move things around in Italy. To organize and incorporate a company takes a month. Here in this country, it takes hours. If you need to issue a convertible promissory note in this country, you do it between the company and the investor. And in Italy, you need to go in front of a notary public. Labor is still more structured. Finances is still more structured. Things here, with the exception of SEC 504, 505, and 506, allow accredited investors basically to invest in anything without any SEC registration. So there is no question in my mind that the law, the legislation, the judicial system needs to improve in Italy in order to get up to speed with companies like Ignazio's company, Gianmauro's company, and many other very valid companies in Italy moving in the right direction. The problem most of the time U.S. investors have with the Italian company is really the certainty of the law. I mean, if you have a problem here in the United States, you resolve it in maybe 1 or 2 years of a litigation. In Italy, good luck. And so that's, believe it or not, sometimes comes down to those things. And what we need to do, what the audience need to do, and the government needs to do, is to stay closer to entrepreneurs like Ignazio and his segment of operation, and allow a better, leaner, more effective legislation on all levels, on a corporate level, on a labor level, on a finance level, on a notary level, because this way is certainly going to allow the great ingenuity of the Italian entrepreneurs to go and align themselves with what happens now in Silicon Valley.
But I heard that it's improving the situation. So now it's a few years that I don't live anymore in Italy, but very recently it's improving the situation. So there are some new laws that are allowing to create company faster, but still I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done to arrive to the same level of US.
But Ignazio was saying earlier to me, and I would like him to share with you, that now there are a lot of advantages. There are clear disadvantages, and we know this has been there for a long time. But there are also some unique advantages of Italy as a place to start a business. So Ignazio, can you educate
Yeah,
us
I
about
mean,
those?
let me just mention a few facts. We have since 3 years, if I remember correctly, we have a piece of regulation in Italy about the so-called innovative startups. You can register as an innovative startup in an extremely simple way. You just have to communicate to the Chamber of Commerce that you are fulfilling the requisites, and the requisites are quite simple, like if you have, for example, all your employees have a superior degree, you can register already. That's enough to be an innovative startup, and it's automatic. As an innovative startup, you get your investors can deduct 500,000 of their investment from taxes. Your employees can be
Deduct or keep it exempt, because they're two different things.
no, they can deduct, plus they have an exemption on capital gains when they will sell the stakes in the
So
company.
if I invest 500,000,
You
I
can
take
deduct it
half a
from-
million off
Yeah,
my income statement that year?
absolutely. That's what the law says.
Amazing.
It's not.
So
It's not.
basically, the government is giving you at least half that much. Given the marginal tax rate in Italy, this we're talking about.
It is
It's-
capped at 500,000.
You
I
can.
understand, but-
The talents that repatriate to Italy after, I remember it's at least 2 years, and then it goes up until 5 years, until 2 years abroad, they can get exemptions on a significant part of their income taxes. It's been decreased. Now it was 70%. It's now 30%, but it's still very significant. The new legislation on labor in Italy, and that's not related to startups, that's in general, have made, I must confess, extremely flexible to, start a new firm and also to dissolve a new firm if things do not go well, which was a big problem before this new piece of law. And in my point of view, it's now working very well. By the way, many entrepreneurs don't know, but if you get the good tax advisors, you can easily also use this new opportunity. There is exemption for a number of benefits to employees. So, for example, in our case, since our salaries tend to be pretty low because we are a startup, we are conscious of cost, but one thing we are using is we can pay houses for our employees, and there's exemption on that benefit as well, which helps a lot. So all these things are in place, and they have been done. And and quite honestly, I believe it's. Of course, there are still a lot of complexities in Italy, and probably some dimensions are more complex than they are in London or in the US. But I must say, in my experience, also a lot of new things has been done which are working pretty well. And actually, you've got thousands of innovative startups right now in Italy. In Milan, I believe if you just add up the people working in fintech firms like my own, but there is also Money Farm, where Paolo, I believe, is still on the board, which is an important robo-advisor created in Italy. Now it's also has also an important actually office in London. There are other startups like Satispay, which I was showing to you before, a peer-to-peer payment company. And there are many others. I believe there are at least 500 people working in fintech right now in Milan only. And if I add up the people working in fintech in the lab of Unicredit and in the lab of Intesa and even in Popolare Milano, one thing Giuseppe did not mention is that Popolare Milano is actually quite advanced in internet banking historically. I believe if you add up all these things, you've got at least 3 to 5,000 people working already in fintech in Milan. London claims they have 14,000 people working in fintech. And of course, they include all the people working in banks in fintech. And fintech creates, by the way, a lot of good jobs because these are, data scientists, risk managers, financial services technology is quite interesting. So I believe a lot has been done. Probably more could be done. For example, one concrete thing that would help a lot is if we could create a special channel for approving new licenses from Bank of Italy and Consob for fintech. Just because of that, you would attract a lot of firms from London, from other places in Europe. One of the things London has done very well is the provisionary authorization that you can get from the FCA, where they say you don't need to prepare 1,000 pages, but we will grant you a license for 6 months immediately. And then we will see what happens. If it doesn't work, we take back the license. Just implementing this is not expensive, doesn't need government money. It's just a decision, and I'm sure it would help a lot to make Milan an even bigger hub for fintech.
Building on this, I would like to know also from the other member of the panelists, if you were asked by, let's say, Renzi, what is the one thing you would do to make Italy a better place for startups? I know there are a lot, but what would be the number one thing for you, Nicola?
Well, as I said before, I think the legal infrastructure is going to be critical to, as Ignazio pointed out, all the points that he was making about, improvement of the status quo are all legal. When he talks about the employee and the dismissal of the company and liquidation, or fiscal and tax related. So if you can do a better job in the regulation and provide a more viable and fast system, you're going to attract business and entrepreneur and venture capital and hedge funds, not only from Italy, but from everywhere in the world. I would be interested, Ignazio, to understand, for example, in your company, how many investors are Italian and how many are, from outside of Italy?
We have, most of them are Italian, but we have 3 significant investors, one from London, one from France, one from Germany.
Yeah. So that's what we would like to see more. We would like to see companies of this level, innovative, high tech, with young people, forward thinking, to be subject to investment of not only from 20, 30 investors, 3 from outside of Italy, but maybe more. And I think that many of the investors see Italy, in my opinion, with some sort of fear that they're going to get in some situation that is going to be very difficult to get out. So, I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I
You sound like.
well, I actually try to create wealth on the other side of the world most of the time. For the past 27 years, I think I have created more than 1,000 enterprise owned by Italian companies. So I help them to see and to invest in this country, which is not that easy, because even from a company standpoint, there is a company in New York, in Illinois, in California. So you need to really accompany by hand. I would like to see the same thing happening to Italy. And I think that the legal infrastructure needs to grow, needs to learn, needs to open in order to allow companies such Ignazio and GM to do better and to attract investment easily.
Or you can help us to build the trading me for the SMEs of Illinois.
You know, we're happy to do it.
But better regulation is, of course, what we all want. But what is the highest priority? Something that actually is implementable in final time? Because if you're saying we want to have a better judiciary and have it last, all the trials last a shorter period of time. Of course, we all want that, but how to do it is not easy. So should we kill the public notaries? Is that like the solution of the problem in Italy? What is the...
I would say yes.
Okay. So now we have a proposal on the table.
I would say yes. I mean, there is no reason by all in the world that you should wait for a month or a month and a half to formalize a società per azioni or a società di responsabilità limitata. There is no reason whatsoever to have that. I mean, in Delaware, it takes 3 hours. In Illinois, you go directly to the office of the Secretary of State and they gave you the charter of the corporation in your hands. You hand them a check of $125, not thousands of euro in the hands of a notary. I think the infrastructure, the way they've created this regulation, it creates the slowness. You want to create convertible notes in order to raise seeding money from angel accredited investors. You have either you go directly, you sign a contract. In this country, we have the beautiful concept of freedom of contract, which means that we don't have codes. We articulate the contracts absolutely based on the negotiation between the parties, and that's why contracts in the United States are longer than contracts in Italy, and that's the way it is. We don't have to change the article of incorporation. We don't have to have a restatement of the article of incorporation unless you start issuing a Class A series, in which case you need, as you know, need to restate the article of incorporation. That, you know, everything is done very easily. You basically get in front of a table, you get a document that at this point is very standardized. You know, you don't have to do particular and complex document, and you sign up a document in a couple of hours and you raise money. That's, in my opinion, something that should be followed.
So we have an opportunity here because we have the privilege in Chicago to have a senator of the Italian Republic, Senator Turano. So he could be actually the guy who proposes in Parliament before the Senate is abolished. He proposes in Parliament the abolition of the notary, and he has a big advantage. He lives in the United States, so he can actually survive.
Yeah.
The revenge of the notaries, the famous revenge of the notaries. So I think that you should walk. You know Senator Turano well, so I think that you have an opportunity.
He's my
here.
client, so.
But let's talk to Gianmauro. What is your proposal?
So I think what Nicola was saying is perfectly true. But on top of this, there is another important aspect that is related to the life and the life of a startup. So I see that there are a lot of startups. Ignazio mentioned a few thousands that started just in the last few years. But the main problem is that what these startups will do when they are
When they grow up.
when they grow up,
If they
and
do.
if when they are successful. So typically the two ways are acquisition by larger corporation and IPO. And so if I have to compare the ecosystem in Silicon Valley and in Italy, basically every corporation in US is doing a lot of acquisition, is investing an important amount of their budget to acquire company. And on one side, on the other side, they are investing in venture capitalists as limited partners, or they are investing directly in startups, and they are investing a lot in universities that they can do, they can advance the research much quicker than we are doing in Italy. So in my opinion, there should be, as a solution, there should be a big incentive for corporation to invest in, when they do acquisition and when they invest in research or research institutions, or when they invest in startups as well. So this can increase the number of I mean, because when you increase the number of exit, automatically, or the company that do IPOs, automatically investors are more incentivized. So right now, as Ignazio was saying, they have an incentive of paying less taxes, but I don't see a path of what is the real benefit of investing the capital in the midterm.
But if I may add to this, this also depends on what are the domains in which you are investing, what are the verticals in which the startup is operating. Because what you are saying, Gianmauro, is very true. If you build a startup in maybe health tech or artificial intelligence or robotics, if you have this kind of startup in Italy, which by the way is not the right startup to be built in Italy, but if you have it, you would have a lot of challenges at finding the right exit. However, if you have a startup in finance in Italy or in Europe, there are plenty of banks that routinely buy startups in fintech. Santander has just invested 120 millions together with ING to buy a minority stake in a fintech startup. Intesa and Unicredit would continuously invest in these kind of things. Similarly, if you have, for example, my investor, the owner of Technogym, is many times acquiring a startup in the wellness space. So, for example, all the startups building digital apps for monitoring your health state, for monitoring blood pressure. They make continuous acquisitions in this space. Similarly, in fashion tech, you would have a lot. So it depends on what you are building.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. But on the other side, I think so. The volumes of successful startups and acquisition
Are
is
much
still
smaller,
is
yeah,
still
sure.
small compared to the population. And so, of course, there are these areas that are pretty successful, but you're asking, I mean, how we can improve this. And so I think we need to extend this to other industries. And so it should be something normal to invest, I don't know, 3, 4, 5% of your income in acquisition or venture, right? Like most of the US companies are doing. And then the legal part, I think, is also important to the investment, because of course the capital in Italy could be not enough to incentivize this model. So you need to attract foreign investment as well. And when the law system is not stable, is not, I mean, you don't really know what's going on, because you're gonna have the same case in two different courts. One is ruling for white, the other one is ruling for black. So a foreign investor, of course, can be also not very, they cannot be comfortable in putting their funds in Italy. And so I think it's a collection of things that needs to be done. But for sure, I saw a lot of progress, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, because the things looks like they are starting to move.
There is one big piece that is also missing in Europe from in the startup ecosystem, which is a real disadvantage, and that's the government investments. Let me be a bit more specific on this. Gianmauro was telling me the story of Loop AI, which is extremely interesting in this respect, because if I understand, the top two scientists of Loop AI were recruited by you, and you decided to go and look for the people working in DARPA-CALO. DARPA-CALO is a project of the Department of Defense in the United States, where the Department of Defense has spent 200 million euro. This is just part of hundreds of $billions spent by the government of this country, not in 1 or 2 years, but in 20 or 30 years. So whenever you use an iPhone, the GPS has not been created by a venture capitalist. The GPS has been created by the government. The internet has been created by the government. The Siri that you are using is also government money. these programs have taken years and years of investments. And the Americans are very deliberate on this. They don't invest because, the IRR should be this or should be. They invest because they decided to invest, and whatever it takes, they go and invest hundreds of billions. Now, this notion that government as a role is something that we are completely missing in Italy and in Europe. And we fool ourselves with this stupid idea that innovation should come from individual entrepreneurs like me, blah, 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 which is, frankly, that's bullshit. Because real innovation, big innovation, has always come from government money, full stop, from big money spent for decades. Of course, this is not something we can change, but I wanted to add this to the environment, because when we say that we can create venture capital in Italy or in Germany, that's complete bullshitting. Venture capital cannot live without an environment where you have these hundreds of scientists that come from big
Everywhere.
projects. Big projects. Everybody wants to work at DARPA. They take the best people of the United States, they go from all the world, by the way. And we have this idea in Europe that working for the government is always stupid, is very bad. And so we will never create, I believe, very big things in research without changing a bit this.
That is a big change.
I'm surprised that your suggestion was not to save on the bonus for the 18 years old and use that money to invest in R&D.
To some extent, yes. I believe Professor Mazzucato say this, as you probably know, and her kind of debate has always been you should not give tax breaks, but rather create. And I tend to agree. I believe. I mean, my investors.
No, this is not a tax break. This is like a gift, an electoral gift.
Yeah.
So you can cut down on that.
Probably
and use money.
and invest. I would be very happy because I don't think, even in my case, I don't think that these tax breaks were decisive for doing what we are doing.
But what I'm surprised nobody raised, in particular, sort of Nicola, but anybody, is the treatment of failure, both from a cultural point of view and from a legal point of view. And it says in Silicon Valley, failure is almost like a badge of honor. If you have not failed once, you have not tried hard enough. The way we were raised in Italy was definitely not the case. I don't know whether people are raised differently now. I'm happy to know if things have changed. But certainly from a legal point of view, things have not changed. And as a sort of a CEO of a company, you rarely get in trouble. You can do anything you want, and there are plenty of examples, except if your company goes into bankruptcy, because we have one of the toughest criminal bankruptcy procedure in the world. Bancarotta fraudolenta is a concept that is rarely applied here in the United States. I don't know even if it exists. In Italy, is very common. So should we do something on that front? And so the cultural front is more difficult, but it starts also from meetings like this. And from a legal point of view, I think it is possible. So starting with you, Nicola, who are probably more prepared on this issue, should we do something on that thing to make failure easier in Italy?
Well, a couple of years ago, I don't remember the year because it's not something that I deal with all the time. I think there was a reorganization of the bankruptcy code, the reorganization of the concordato preventivo in order to make it easier to apply for what we know here in the United States as Chapter 11, essentially something that is a mix between concordato preventivo and amministrazione controllata. And there is something that is being done. Concordato preventivo now is easier to achieve. Bankruptcy is still a sign of disappointment, a sign of that you have essentially violated the law. Yeah, well, we have a fraudulent bankruptcy here, something similar as a concept of a bancarotta fraudolenta in the United States as well. The issue here is much easier to start again after having filed either a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 11. In Italy, if you go in fallimento, you basically are essentially not in the condition to start the day after, and you're going to be in a condition to have to wait a number of years, at least if I remember correctly, 5, before you can be reinstated in the society as an imprenditore, which is the concept with which you conduct your business.
If I remember correctly, my law, and was a long time ago, you even lose your ability to be elected to public office, even to
Correct.
vote. Or not?
You lose your ability to, for a number of years, you lose the ability of capacità di agire, which is the well, that's our code. That's our civil code. Welcome to the Italian civil code. It's called the capacità di agire, the capacità to have a bank account, the capacità to travel, the capacità to essentially to
Better not to fail.
to act in any public office. It's a big deal. So your point is well taken. The problem is that the culture in Italy is such that imprenditori and companies have taken so much advantage of the law and have created very difficult and disastrous sometimes that the laws essentially are the result of the behavior of cultural behavior of the people living in Italy. So I see that what happened a couple of years ago with the reorganization of the Concordato Preventivo already a step in the right direction. I doubt it, honestly, that bankruptcy is going to be made easier under the current circumstances.
But so Ignazio, all those educated people who start those innovative startups, etc., if they don't make any money, and at some point they need to sort of close down. Suppose that they don't close down in bonis, as it's hard to close down in bonis and situation. So are they going to lose the ability to be in public office? Are they going to go around with a scarlet letter around? Is that the case?
First of all, let me make a joke. I was thinking while listening to Nicola that actually a nice piece of research academically could be the simulation of what would happen to President Trump with his sixth bankruptcy if he was to act in the Italian legislation.
He would be
I was
arrested.
fascinated because I believe he
would be arrested.
could face.
This is actually a reading feature of the Italian system. Might not be able to be elected.
Exactly, exactly. Because
Remember,
It's interesting. Six bankruptcy. Am I right?
remember, the Trump companies filed bankruptcy, not him personally.
But he was a director, probably.
Correct, but his
So
company.
in Italy, I
filed
mean, if you're a director of six bankruptcy, I believe you can not even walk in. But no, out of just going to the point that Luigi was making, let's make a big distinction. One thing is employees, and the other thing is director. So I believe for employees, and so which means for the 14 people working with me, one of them is director with me, so it's different. But for the employees, frankly, I don't see it. I mean,
No, for the employees, no. But for
No.
you as a director,
for me as a director and for the other co-founder who is a director as well, and for our chairman, yes, it's a big mess. I mean, actually, it's quite unfortunate if you have to dissolve the company. And what happens in Italy, the beauty in America is that you can kind of negotiate what are the terms for dissolving the company, and if you negotiate something, it will never be changed. That's roughly described. I'm not an expert, but that's roughly it. In Italy, what happens is that after many years, somebody can come in and decide that it was fraudulent because I did something and that's still something that is there. It's a risk, it's a problem, it's a mess, and.
but can't you create a company under Irish law and located in Italy, or can you create under? There is now a
need to
European
have
law. There is a European
You
company.
still need to have the legale rappresentante, the legal representative of the company, which will be essentially responsible under the circumstances.
And so if you have an Irish company located in Italy that goes bankrupt, it goes bankrupt under Italian law.
Correct.
So you cannot arbitrage that
And
away.
certainly in fintech, I mean, you cannot do lending to Italian companies unless you are supervised by Bank of Italy.
I see. So so much for
See, the
so
law-
that the passporting rules and all these things that they say that we are a
the-
common
the-
market and
the law,
okay.
I
This is
believe,
still
is
very
the-
complex.
I believe is the 215 of 1995, the new law of the diritto internazionale privato, tells you that you need to litigate in the places where your company is located and is doing business. So if you have a company owned by an Irish owner and is doing business in Italy, the Italian applicable law will regulate any controversy and any issue related to bankruptcy or anything else.
But very often when you sign some contracts, you say, oh, this can be litigated under British law. So, and certainly companies in Italy issue bonds that under British law.
It depends on the parties. If you apply the Trattato di Roma, if you are within the area of Europe, you apply the Convention for the International Sales of Goods. If you are outside of the European
I'm just saying Italian companies, an example, Telecom, when they issue some bonds, they issue bonds in Luxembourg under British law.
Okay.
And so I know because it's important, these bonds cannot be redenominated in case Italy gets out of the euro because they're not subject to Italian jurisdiction. So it is possible for companies to issue, while located in Italy, to issue instruments under somebody else's law.
Correct, yes.
So why can't I do the financing under British law, all my financing, and then in that case I cannot apply British bankruptcy?
For purposes of the issuance, you can.
Okay.
It remains to be seen what you can do if there is any litigation relating to that issue, whether that litigation, it also depends on whether the plaintiff in that particular case is an Italian plaintiff or is a plaintiff residing outside of Italy. So if you have an Italian plaintiff, usually the law in Italy is that you sue the defendant in the residence of the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a yes or no question. You need to give me a little more information so that I can.
It depends.
It depends. I mean, like I tell.
It
my
depends,
client,
and
it depends.
a big fit,
Yeah.
a big fee, lawyers fee
Oh,
later.
come on,
I
don't
found the
start,
answer.
don't start with this, please.
Now, let me open the floor for questions because I'm sure many of you want to ask questions to the panelists. Yes, over there. Wait for a second that the microphone is coming.
Yes, so basically we heard a few appreciations about the market of venture capital in Italy and how it compares to the States. What I didn't get to hear though is which one are the difference in Italy at least between venture capital and corporate venture capital, because I'm tempted to say that the situation may be different as corporations have different strategies or purposes for the investment, and also the startups that are being financed by corporate venture capitals face different restrictions.
So Ignazio, you seem to be the most knowledgeable here.
The first observation I would make is that corporate venture capital in Italy is relatively underdeveloped. So you don't have big institutions, big corporate venture capital firms yet. What you have is something from the big telcos and the big banks in corporate venture capital. Typically, the difference should be that corporate venture capital is also offering, in addition to capital, is offering access to client base, to operational expertise. So it's a kind of a combination of capital, but also incubating the firm and giving the firm access to some other assets. That's the good part of corporate venture capital. The bad part of corporate venture capital might be that because corporate venture capitalists act with these unfair advantages, this sometimes lead to their teams not always being best in class, because the best venture capitalists would rather want to work for pure venture capital firms that are going for just financial returns. Because when you go for just financial returns, you would go for the best of the best, whereas corporate venture capitalists sometimes are accused to also look for the average firms. because then they can help them with their other assets. So there's this kind of dialect. I would say that it's a good thing, however, that, for example, the large banks in Italy are establishing corporate venture capital units. I believe they are, as Gianmarco said, part of the ecosystem. So it's helpful to have both kind of institutions.
Yeah, even also what I notice is that larger corporation, especially in the US, typically they have a corporate arm that is investing directly, but they also invest as a limited partner in VCs. So the two things that I think are not, they invest in both of the things, and typically when you have a corporate, is because the company is looking for a benefit, industrial benefit from that startup, and in the
It's
short term.
interesting. Google has got two different units. There's Google Ventures and Google Capital. Google Ventures is more similar to a pure VC, and they would invest in really kind of extremely advanced tech investments, like the things of the future. Whereas Google Capital invests in later stages and is looking much more at Google assets when they invest.
Was a question? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Very interesting discussion. My question is, so my take from this conversation is that it's clearly a huge gap between the current situation and what's, the best performing, entrepreneurial environment, which is Silicon Valley. I just was hoping to get a little bit more of a dynamic perspective. So from your point of view, how has the, let's say, entrepreneurship and also investment, early stage investment environment changed over the past few years in Italy? If you are seeing some, specific communities arising, if you're seeing specific hubs in terms of, let's say, entrepreneurship being created, and if there is any chance that we are slowly catching up.
Why don't you try to answer, Gianmarco? Because I think Ignazio, to some extent, already answers this question earlier. But what do you,
No, so
your perspective?
I believe in the past 3 years there have been a huge development in hubs, especially for the very early stage in Italy, and so that's why I think you start to see thousands of companies, because also they typically find probably not a large amount of capital, but some capital. And I think right now, from my perspective, it's much. If you are a very very early stage, probably it's much easier to raise capital if it is a small amount in Italy, especially if it is not from traditional venture capitalists. That anyway, there are just a few in our country, rather than in US, where there is a lot of competition and there are probably 10 times the number of companies, and there are more VCs, but there are also more companies looking for money. And then the other thing is, typically in US, what I experienced is that for foreign people is much difficult to raise capital. They typically want to invest in companies that have a strong tie to their ecosystem. So, especially from Silicon Valley, you notice that in the teams there is always someone that is coming from Stanford, Berkeley, and because it's something that they can control better. And
There was one last question over there. Somebody has raised their hands? Or? No, here. Okay.
Thank you very much for the discussion. It was very interesting. A question about the scale. So a startup in the US has access immediately to a market of 350 million people, and also at the same time a capital market that is the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. In Europe, for the moment, it seems like you don't have that, at least until they don't create a digital common market and a common capital market. So from your perspective, have worked in Italy, in Europe, how much do you think this factor is hindering the development of the startup environment and in general the tech industry?
It is definitely a very important factor. I would say the extent to which you can leverage the European scale varies by industry. So if we are talking fintech here, I would say in fintech, I wouldn't say it's a completely domestic market. You already have examples of fintech companies operating out of UK and France and Germany at the same time. You have, just to make a few examples about Italy, some of the new digital lenders that you have in Italy, two of them are coming from France. One is called United Credit and the second one is Lendix. They have started to operate in France and now they are passporting their license to Italy. So in that case, it is working. You have TransferWise in the UK, which is operating in a number of different countries, and it's actually scaling up quite well. You have Funding Circle in the UK, which is operating as well in Germany and in Spain, and they are planning to come to Italy. So fintech is I would say, like all financial services, retail financial services can never be completely global. And I would not also underestimate the complexity of operating in different states in the US. Remember, Lending Club is operating under very complex regulatory web, so they have a different license for each different state, so it's also very complex for them. So it's not that bad, I would say, under that dimension. Of course, if you have Spotify, then in that industry is much easier. Financial services will always be a bit more complex, but Europe is not doing so bad under that specific dimension.
So I have a little bit different opinion here because I experienced with my previous company to start in Italy, and then I started Spain, Portugal, UK, and Germany. And basically, it's like for my experience in around the beginning of this decade, the previous decade, it's like building 5 different companies. So I had to raise a separate capital to bootstrap because of course it depends on the market. Depends on the market. So if you are going into the consumer market, it's much difficult because anyway you have to build a team that has to know the local culture. That one because you cannot have just a general marketing go to market for every European country. There are too many differences. And then the language aspect seems to be easy, but then if you have a website, a service, and then you need to translate everything, and you need to make sure that those things make sense, you need to have a local team. So it's kind of hard compared to a market that is not fragmented like US, where you can just do one thing and you can just apply almost horizontally the same strategy. And of course, there are also, it's not only US, but there are several different markets. But on the other side, I think companies now have, for example, my current company, they have the ability with a small amount of capital to scale in different markets much quicker. For example, in our case, we bootstrapped in Asia, and we are based in San Francisco. So and then we did Europe and then US. So it depends really on the business that you are doing and in the type of market, if it is consumer or business.
And with this, I would like to end. First of all, let me thank all of you to have endured until this late hours here. It's been a long day. Thank you very much for your participation. But most importantly, let's thank the panelists who did a fantastic job. Thank you.
And very, very few announcements.